Hello everyone, I'm Joseph Bonifacio, one of the campus missionaries with Every Nation Campus, and this is the Victory Leadership Podcast. Today we have with us Pastor Kevin York. Pastor Kevin is the Executive Director of Every Nation in Nashville. Today we're going to talk about leading people, and we're going to zoom in on one particular skill. And it's a very precise skill, it's a very exacting skill of asking the right questions, and how this single skill could transform so much of our leadership at home, at work, or everything else. Pastor Kevin, why is asking the right questions important when leading people?
Well, first, I used to think I was very good at asking questions.
Aren't we all?
And then I made the serious mistake of signing up for a coaching certification.
Okay.
And part of being a great coach is being able to craft a great question. I had never even heard the concept of a good question or a poor question. And so I went off to be trained, and I quickly realized I didn't know how to ask a great question. One of the first skills is making sure that you don't ask closed-ended questions, questions that can be answered with a yes or a no or a maybe, if you're trying to reflect.
Okay.
So the beginning skill of asking a great question is to create an open question to get a person talking. So using terms like describe how you felt, or tell me about the time that you, or how do you feel when, those are very great questions because it gets into the person's soul. Continuing questions, so tell me more about that as you try to draw out a person. And I can't tell you how much, not only has that helped me as a consultant and as a coach, but as a husband, as a father, and as a granddad.
All of those areas.
It's changed my ability to engage. It's interesting what James says about words. He says that words are like a spark to a forest. There's not a one-to-one correlation with words. There's a 1 to 10,000 correlation. In fact, he said the tongue is a fire.
Yeah.
And so the illustration he uses is that one word could burn down an entire forest. And I've seen that in a human soul. From a word I've said, the fire started.
Yeah.
And it burned for months. And more words can't put out that soul fire. And so, like James was saying to his church, if you can control the tongue, but because you can't tame it, but through the Spirit you can control it. And that's why it's so hard, these questions and the Spirit behind the question.
Why is asking good questions essential in leadership? In school, at the workplace, in a nonprofit sector? How does that transform leadership there?
First of all, many times we think as leaders, as I have so often failed at, that we think we know all the information we need to know, and we make decisions,
right,
and we make commands, or we create edicts. And actually, they're poor decisions because we haven't engaged in a perspective loop by engaging people with questions. Secondly, it might be a great answer and a great thing to do, but now what you've done is you've marginalized someone, you haven't let them have a voice in it, or you've asked poor questions and not given them the ability to respond. And so I find myself often in our executive team meeting emotional because we believe in rigorous debate, and having to calm myself down and recraft in my mind the question that I was about to ask so that I can engage people and draw out of their hearts and their souls and their minds the best wisdom and the best advice and the best perspective that we can get. And so I think in leadership, it's critical to ask great questions because you want the best. You know, I told a person I didn't hire you just for one aspect of what you do. I hired you for your brain. I hired you for your intellect. I hired you for everything. And I want you to be all in this conversation. And one of the things that makes an employee feel all in is when you ask them great questions.
Right.
And you get them to talk.
Could we just try to role play that?
We used to do this because this will explain why it's so difficult just to throw out a question. When I worked with a friend of mine and my wife, we did this for years actually, to train me how to listen and ask questions. He would make us pick a subject that we always got in a fight over, that it always ended up in a knockdown, drag out with no one, with no connectivity at all.
Right.
And he would take a little index card and hand it to my wife. And he would start and he'd say, okay, you pick the subject. And then she would have to start talking. And she would talk until she had completely explained to me everything that she felt about that, which went on about 6 hours. Not really, but almost 6 hours. And so all the detail and all of those things. And then she would hand me the card. Now all I could do was repeat back to her what she said until I said back to her everything that she meant when she was saying that.
So you said earlier that this is how you feel whenever I do
Yes.
this.
Yes.
And what you mean by that is I'm
Is
being
this,
inconsiderate.
Yes. And so, no, just what you said.
No, okay.
That's all I was at.
Okay.
Just verbally what you actually said. And then the next round is I had to give her the card back because she'd have to tell me, no, I missed this. And then I'd say that. And so we'd go back and forth until she said, no, that you have said exactly what I said. Then he'd give me the card. And he would say, okay, I want you to tell her what you felt like her body was telling you.
Okay.
80% of communication is the rolling of the eyes, the flaring of the nostrils, all the imagery that's coming from that stunning, gorgeous woman as she is angry with me. And then I would say, but this is what I felt, which is different than what you said. And then she would tell me if that was true or not true. And then the last one, because you're not finished yet.
Wow.
The last one is, but this is what I think you mean.
You would say.
Yeah. I would have to tell her what I thought she meant. Our history, all the things that make up the backdrop of our marriage.
And all the verbal and body language.
Exactly. All of that together. And by the time we finished that, there was an understanding level that I have never achieved before in our marriage. And we would do that for 1 hour every night for a long, long time. And now
Wow.
it's intuitive with us. It's how we communicate. So let me see if I get you right, honey. You said this. Yes, I said that. Now, you're pretty animated. There's a lot of emotion behind that. So I was thinking that you're like feeling this. Yes, I'm feeling that. Or no, I'm not feeling that.
You're reading too much into it.
Yeah, you're reading too much into it. But you know, we've kind of had a history with this deal, and your mama and your, all that, and then, so is that part of this too? And so, in a team, in a small group, there's backdrop.
Yeah.
There's lives. And so when you craft a question, there's backdrop, there's this meeting.
Yeah.
And so I find myself all the time in various meetings, because it's subconscious with us, we're actually crafting questions based on all of that information that we're so quickly picking up.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes out wrong, it comes out bad. So it's quite difficult to craft a good question in times of intensity. And many times I find myself asking the question and say, no, wait, let me reframe that. Let me say that over again. And take some of the emotion out. I'm sorry. I'm amped up because of this, and I want to take the emotion out. Because the same question with body language that is really amped up and a history is is pretty complex.
Wow.
Was that just theoretical? I hope that was helpful.
Well, it sounded miraculous to me to be able to have that level of a discussion about a hot-tempered topic with your spouse. It sounded like someone who can handle volatile chemicals without them blowing up in his face.
Well, believe me, it is a art. It is something you have to learn. It's a discipline. We actually went through that exercise for a long, long time.
Now, who in the Bible do we see asking good questions? I mean,
Jesus was the master. Who do you say that I am? He was constantly, he even, when he was asked questions, he answered it with a question because he wanted them to reflect. He wanted them to think about it. Mm-hmm. And so he was a great question asker. All through Scripture, you see profound questions. The rhetorical that rises out of the book of Malachi. Who you say, it's that whole idea. Because it does engage a different part of the brain. I try to get someone to stop being on autopilot and flip into the non-intuitive side of the brain.
The thinking, the conscious.
That side of the brain, and you do that with great questions. You're clicking off autopilot.
Wow.
And you're really diving into what's really there. Because we spend 80% of our life in answering questions on autopilot because it's the easiest.
So what are some practical tips or steps that we can use if we want to learn this skill? And it's one single skill that can work in our marriage, our parenting, in our jobs, in our schools, in our victory groups. How would we start? Like what you said preparation a lot. How would we prepare a great question? How do we do that?
I would sit down alone and I would begin to write questions that are calling for an open-ended response.
Okay.
So questions like describe to me how you feel how you felt when that happened. When I'll go to my wife and I'll go. This is almost a scripted question, but she knows it's very sincere and very genuine. But I'll go to her and I'll say, hon, I did this a few minutes ago, and I really feel bad. I wanted to know. I hope that I didn't hurt your feelings. So why don't you talk to me about that moment? Do you remember that moment? And get her to bring that out.
Right.
But that's after years of actually crafting questions for meetings, and I think it's critical for you to become a good question asker. So I would practice by writing questions. I would practice by buying books like Transformational Coaching that has about 300 questions categorized in the back of it, and reading those and seeing how that structure and what that does when you read that question.
Right.
Because it is a discipline.
Would you prepare even, I know you said scripted, and we're not trying to be scripted, but it's a way for us to prepare and keep away from the knee-jerk animalistic reactions that we tend to have.
Yeah.
Would you prepare even if they didn't answer the first question? Like how you would rephrase that? Do you just give up? Or?
No, I actually walk through the scenarios of if I ask the question and they kind of bounce off. That's when I've learned to say, well, try to tell me a little bit more about that. I won't let that just pass.
Okay.
And so I guess, I'll ask this question a lot. I guess you don't think about that very much because it doesn't seem to be a big deal with you. And so I keep trying to reframe it and come from a different angle. And then if it's not there, it's just not there.
Right.
But all that is a skill, because I was terrible at that. I have developed this as a skill. You're not born this way. I don't think anybody falls out highly advanced in the art of asking great questions. So prepare.
Nice. That's encouraging. And then the second thing, so we prepare, and the second thing you mentioned was active listening. Mm-hmm. What is active listening, and how is that different from listening?
Active listening is total engagement. It's your body language. It's your posture. It's being dialed in. It's not looking at your phone. It's turning your phone off. It's I'm here listening to you. I'm not here with my iWatch going like this every 3 minutes, hanging up the phone call, looking at my watch. That's disengaged. That's not engaged. And it's a lie that you can multitask. They have proven that.
Yeah.
But if I'm actively listening, I'm totally dialed in. The second thing, I reflect back to you what you say to make sure I've got it. So you've just talked for 5 minutes and say, just let me see if I'm understanding you correctly, and then I say it back to you. It's a constant conversation loop where I'm reflecting back to you what you're saying and then what you're meaning. And that's active listening.
It sounds almost oxymoronic for me to be able to do something that strong, that productive, just by listening.
Yes.
And yet, it seems like that's where a lot of the big rocks in a person's soul could be moved.
Yes, it is. I honestly believe that. And a lot of the big rocks in my soul are removed from these disciplines.
Right.
To be fully alive and fully engaged with another person is truly servant. That's truly the role of a servant. Dignifying your time with them in every aspect of listening. And the more we can do that, the more profound we will lead everyone.
That would be an amazing way to engage people for Jesus.
Yes, it is.
In a world that's so busy and so noisy,
Yeah.
for them to have a conversation with someone who actually really wanted to listen and ask the right questions.
That's great.
Well, thank you so much, Pastor Kevin. This has been very helpful for me. I can't wait to try it on my marriage, on our son, especially in making disciples.
That's great.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Joseph. It's great being here.